Welcome back to the third and final part of this super long story. Thank you for being so patient with me on this one. I have a quick announcement to make. A few days ago, I reached the 4,000 hour watch time, which is one of the requirements to get monetized. The other is to reach 1,000 subscribers. I did some research and people tend to have a harder time reaching the watch hours, but here I am with 601 subs, so if you haven't already, it would help me out so much if you could hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, and share with your friends who also like creepy horror stories. Thank you so much, and let's get started. We slept as if we were dead until the monk woke us up. After we sat up and situated ourselves in front of him, he said with a smile, "You boys did really well yesterday. I was able to successfully exorcise the three of you." We smiled back at him. Although we probably each had a mountain of questions to ask, none of us said a word. The monk must have sensed it because he said, "I guess I should explain everything to you. There's something I want to show you. Follow me." He got up and walked out of the house and up towards the temple. When I saw Kai looking all around him as if he was looking for that thing again, I did the same. The monk noticed and said everything should be fine now. "Can you see anything?" he asked. Kai and I both answered in the negative. When we got to the temple, he showed us to the main hall. We followed him through a door on the other side, and we were in another tatami room very similar to the one in the house. He told us to wait, and he left us there. Kai seemed to be a bit nervous and started shaking his legs. The monk returned a bit later with a small wooden box. He sat in front of us and said, "This was how it all began," and opened the box. We looked and saw a shriveled up, dry, small black thing wrapped in cotton inside. What was it? I felt like I'd seen something like that before when it hit me. When I was small, I remember my mum taking out a small wooden box like this from a dresser drawer and bringing it to me. She looked so happy as she opened it and showed me what was inside. I had no idea what I was looking at, but it looked exactly like what the monk was showing us. I asked my mum what it was, to which she replied, "This is your umbilical cord. It's proof that you and I were connected to each other." As a child, I couldn't understand why she would keep something like that. "What is it?" asked Tomoaki. The monk replied that it was an umbilical cord. Tomoaki had never seen one before, but Kai and I had. He continued, "I'm sure your parents were the ones that showed it to you. There are many families who hang on to them as a keepsake. The one in this box is the same. A mother and her child are connected to each other through the umbilical cord. These days, hospitals and birthing clinics give the umbilical cord to the mother when they're discharged as a way to congratulate them. A lot of individuals decide to hang on to them, but there are many superstitions attached to umbilical cords. Back in the day, many people believed in these stories and took it very seriously. One such superstition says that if your child becomes so ill that he or she is on the brink of death, boiling the umbilical cord and having them drink the liquid will save their life. Another one says that if the child holds on to it, that it will protect the child from danger. Both stories have one thing in common: the mother's strong will and determination to protect her offspring. Now, can I tell you a story about this village? It's got everything to do with what has happened." We nodded. It was a long story and I can't remember it word for word, but hopefully it'll be enough to conclude the story and give you guys a sense of closure. The monk began. "The people here also used to believe in all the superstitions revolving around umbilical cords. Considering we're close to the ocean, many of the villagers were fishermen. When a baby was born, they would be out at sea with their father as soon as they were able to tag along. It was a normal occurrence. Fishing out at sea is a dangerous job. The mothers would be waiting nervously for their return each time they went out. This is just my feeling, but it must have been very tough for the mothers to wait for them to come home, not knowing whether they were alive or dead until they did so. It was around this time that the mothers began to give the umbilical cord to the child to protect them, and, if they got lost at sea, that they would be able to find their way home. Find their way home? I interrupted. That's right. Remember, some of these children were still very small. I've heard that it wasn't that uncommon for them to get swept out by the waves. If they weren't found after a few days, they were deemed to be dead. The mothers would wait on the dock for days and days for their return, unable to accept reality. This is where the superstition brought on a new meaning. Just like how the unborn child and the mother were connected through the umbilical cord, a new belief began that it would bring back a lost child to their mother through this now invisible connection. Of course, none of the lost children ever came back, except for this one time. A mother came back crying tears of joy that her child had come home. No one believed her and thought she finally went crazy from grief, and rightfully so. Her child had gone missing more than 3 years ago. Kai piped in. Maybe the kid washed up on shore somewhere and survived? There were people that thought the same, the monk replied. They told her they wanted to see the child, but the mother told them it'll take some time until she could show her kid. What did that even mean? I thought. If the kid had come back, why couldn't she bring him or her forward straight away? It didn't really make sense. I suddenly got goosebumps for no reason. The monk continued speaking. There were many who doubted her and thought she was being overly cryptic, but seeing her grieve for the past several years, no one could push her any further, and they decided to back off. On the following day, the same thing happened to another mother. And just like the first woman, she told everyone that she couldn't show her child to anyone just yet. The people in the village were beginning to get really suspicious. The husband of the mother from the day before had died a short while ago, but the second mother, she was still married. People went looking for her husband and asked him whether it was true, but the husband had no idea what they were talking about. They continued to pry until the husband finally got angry and told them to mind their own business. A few days went by when someone from the village came forward. This person saw the first mother walking along the beach at night with her child. It was too dark to see full details, but from their silhouettes, the mother was seen holding hands with her kid, talking, and overall seemed very happy. Hearing a third person's unclouded observation, everyone felt horrible for doubting the mother and decided to drop by her house to apologize to her. The mother answered the door with the happiest smile across her face. After telling her how bad they felt for not believing her, she told them not to worry, that she couldn't be happier that her baby was back home with her. At that moment, she pulled her kid out from behind the door and hugged him close. Everyone froze as soon as they laid eyes on him. Apparently, his entire body was bluish purple. He was completely bloated, and from his swollen eyelids they could just see a sliver of the whites of his eyes. His pupils, which were barely detectable, were looking in opposite directions. There was foam coming out of his mouth, and he was making strange noises as the mother talked to him. They say it sounded like a crow. The mother looked down at him lovingly and pet his head, which was patchy because most of his hair had fallen out. Sure enough, everyone ran away as quick as their legs could carry them. That night, everyone gathered at the house of the village chief. They told him everything that they witnessed, to which the chief concluded that they would need help from a priest. This priest is my ancestor. Upon hearing what was happening in the village, the priest came to get the mother straight away. He took her back up to his temple by force, and apparently the kid was following them the whole way, letting out those eerie sounds as if it was crying. Once they walked into the temple, the priest took the mother to a room to talk to her, but she was in such an agitated state from being separated from her child that the only words she could string together properly was for the priest to give back her son. She was fighting back with all her might to break free, and although the priest used his full strength to try to pin her down, she pushed him away with incredible force and ran away. The priest tried looking for her with the help of the people from the village, but no one was in the house. When they walked in, they saw tons of offerda all over the walls and a big mountain of rotten food piled in the corner, releasing a horrible stench. I knew it was the same thing I saw up on the second floor. Everyone thought the same thing. The mother had been performing some kind of ritual out of grief, and this thing was born from it. They all stepped up their search efforts to find the woman, while the priest and a few of his followers proceeded to the second mother's house. Once there, they saw the husband trembling in fear while she talked to another grotesque-looking being. The priest began chanting a prayer as he walked towards the thing, but the mother turned to him, her eyes bulging, and began yelling out threats if he got any closer. It all sounded so far-fetched and fake, but I was sweating profusely. Everyone in the village was so scared that they didn't dare come closer to help the priest. But the priest himself and his followers managed to hold the woman down and carried her back to the temple. He continued to chant a prayer and throw salt onto the ground as the thing followed them all the way. They took the woman into the cabin, tied her down with a rope, and locked her inside. The priest and his followers made a circle around the cabin and began to perform an exorcism. The mother screamed and shouted, but they in turn raised their voices so that the thing couldn't hear her. After a while, it appeared out of the bushes. It was searching for its mother and began making circles around the cabin. Not knowing what to expect, the priest continued to pray. Soon after, the thing fell onto its hands and knees, almost as if it was too tired to walk upright. Its joints bent at impossible angles, and it began to crawl close to the ground like a spider. It was as if it was devolving from a human shape into something else. They heard it belch out a cry, and its arms and legs disappeared, its body rolling around like a caterpillar. As the night slowly turned into day, the thing began to shrink, and by morning it had turned back into its original form. An umbilical cord. I was hanging on to every word the monk spoke. It was as if he put some twists on what happened to us the previous night and was telling us a folklore. Tomoaki said, "Hold on a second. The one you have in that box right now." "Yes, we found it this morning. It was on top of a rock a few meters away from the cabin." "Are you serious?" asked Kai. "Why us?" I asked to no one in particular. "I don't know. These stories have been left in writing by previous priests, but I've never come across this happening to anyone other than a mother. We also don't know what ritual they performed in the first place to bring about these creatures," said the monk. The priest wasn't able to ask that woman. When they opened the cabin, they found her unresponsive inside. She was screaming for her child all night, and she'd lost all of her energy. They took her to get treated, but when she woke up, she had lost her mind. It was impossible to ask her anything. It wasn't long before some people found the first woman who managed to run away. Her body was found washed up on the beach. Something had eaten pieces of her flesh, but a smile was plastered onto her face. No one knows what happened to her, but according to what the priest wrote, it said, the mother who had been eaten by her offspring brought nothing less than a picture-perfect smile on her face. After her body's discovery, the people decided to demolish her house. That's when a piece of memo was found amongst the mess. It looked like an account of how this thing came to life, kind of like a growth chart. There were dates on the left column and details of its growth on the right. I can't remember the exact dates, but I remember what was written on it, so just imagine that what I'm about to list now all have different dates associated with them. Number 1, I began the ritual. Number 2, nothing's happened. Number 3, he's come home. Number 4, His arms and legs grew. Number 5, he started crawling. Number 6, he started talking. Number 7, he can stand. The paper was apparently full with the woman's thoughts and feelings. As for the second mother, she had started the ritual up in the attic, so her husband was completely oblivious to what was happening. Apparently, there were lots of similar cases written by the monk's ancestors, but unfortunately, none of it outlined what the mothers actually did or how they even found out about the ritual, meaning that none of them lived to tell the tale, or they went mentally insane that no one could get a word out of them. The monk told us that he was upset at the fact that he didn't find out about us earlier. It was the first time someone other than a mother had been affected, and he admitted he was at a loss. Even entire families living in a house would live their lives never knowing what their wife or mothers had birthed through this ritual. According to what had been passed down thus far, only the mother could see to the growth and development of this creature. Kai said, Makiko, is she one of those mothers? The priest didn't respond straight away, but when he did, we weren't surprised by the answer. He said, Makiko isn't from this village. She moved here when she got married to the husband. They had a son, and they were a very happy family, but a few years ago their son got lost out at sea. There were search parties, but he was never found. Makiko was devastated, but with the help and support of her friends and the others from the town, she slowly found herself again. Their ryokan was doing well, and people were beginning to forget about the tragedy when the second floor suddenly got closed off. No one knew why, but they didn't bother asking. And the result was what you boys saw. I don't know how Makiko knew of the ritual, but that's exactly what happened up there. Usually, whatever is born attaches itself to the mother, but for some unknown reason, it attached itself to you. The only thing I can think of is that she hadn't given the umbilical cord to her son. She isn't from around here, so she didn't even know that such a practice existed. Her husband told me as much. To add to the strangeness of closing up the second floor, she proceeded to hire the 3 of you even though they had much less work to do. The husband was against it, but Makiko cried and told him that she missed his son, and having you guys around would make her feel like he was back, so he finally agreed. This is just a feeling that I have, but I think she knew that the thing upstairs would try to possess one of you. I still feel terrible that I left the 3 of you all alone in that cabin, but I didn't have a choice. I had to save Makiko too. While you guys were here, I had to tie her down in the temple, and just as my ancestors had done, I prayed out loud all night long. I didn't know whether the thing would come here for Makiko or go up to the cabin for the 3 of you. I felt he had nothing to apologize for or feel bad about. Judging from what had occurred in the past, he obviously felt that Makiko could be in danger, even though the thing was actually following us around and not her. The monk was our savior. I looked over at Kai, who was trembling, but he wasn't crying. He was angry. He was so freaking mad that Makiko and her husband had almost killed us. He yelled and asked why the husband didn't warn us even though he knew something was going on. The monk replied that the husband didn't know. He only knew it as a kind of lore that's been passed down through generations. Kai wasn't satisfied. He demanded to see them and yelled and screamed at the monk. It took Tomoki and I a while to calm him down, and the monk sat there quietly, allowing Kai to release his anger. Once he calmed down a bit, the monk said, "When I made the decision to tell you boys the truth, I knew I had to show you everything. Please follow me. I'll take you to Makiko." We followed him further into the main hall, and we eventually went across a walkway that connected to a separate building. As we got closer, we could hear the chanting of prayers and gurgling and moaning sounds coming from within. There were thumping sounds too. I was scared to see what was going on inside, but the monk paid no mind and opened the door. Inside, Makiko was laying on the tatami floor surrounded by other monks who were reading out a prayer. I stood there with my mouth hanging open. Makiko was bouncing around like a fish out of water. I'd never seen a person move like that before. In fact, I didn't know how it was possible for humans to move in that manner. We could hear her gurgling and groaning intermittently as if she were in pain. I was too scared to look at her face. I felt a different kind of fear to the one from previous days. The monk spoke. She's been like this since this morning. We can't seem to stop it. I don't want to be here, said Tomoaki, and all of us stepped out of the building. She was like a completely different person to the woman we said goodbye to. I thought the exorcism was successful, I said, when we were far enough from the building. It was successful. You guys are standing here, and we found the umbilical cord not far from the cabin, but... And Kai cut in. I knew it. There wasn't just one. It took only a couple of seconds for me to understand what he meant. When he first told us he saw the shadows, he told us he saw more than one. The monk couldn't hide his surprise. There was more than one? When Kai answered yes, he went silent until he seemed to remember something and told us to go back to the house and to not step a foot outside of the room we slept in. I'll send someone for you later. He then ran back to where Makiko was. We stood there for some time until we saw them reappear from the building, carrying something that was wrapped up in a huge white cloth. It was writhing around, and we knew Makiko was inside. They were moving as quickly as they could towards the cabin. The three of us looked at each other and booked it out of there. We ran into the house and practically dove into the room the monk told us to remain in. Sorry to let you down, but absolutely nothing happened while we were in there. Another monk came to see us a while later and told us that we had to stay there one more night. He remained in the room with us, and the four of us awkwardly spent the night together. We woke up early the next morning and were watching TV when the monk came in. He told us we were free to leave. He had to double-check but was now sure that there was only one of those things following us, and it was completely exorcised from this world. We were so relieved to hear it. But, the monk said, Makiko wasn't so lucky. I couldn't tell whether he was angry or about to cry. Did she die? We asked. No, she didn't die, he replied. The image of her flopping around on the floor popped back into my head. Was she still stuck in that loop? We asked the monk, but he didn't accept nor deny it. He told us briefly that whatever was happening to her had nothing to do with something possessing her, so it was impossible to perform an exorcism. Whatever ritual she did was different to the one that had been occurring in this village for decades. He guessed that Makiko heard about the ritual from someone somewhere and decided to try it to bring her son back. But instead of her son having the umbilical cord, she had it with her. She proceeded anyway with trial and error, and whatever was born from it was something entirely different. There was more than one on the second floor, and it's unclear if what was meant to be her son was actually among them or not. There wasn't a happy ending for these mothers. They know that when they begin the ritual, but they proceed regardless of that fact because their want and need to have their baby back is stronger than anything else in the entire world. Kai asked what was going to happen to her, but the monk couldn't answer that question because he didn't know, or at least that's what he told us. When we were done talking, the husband came into the room. I was shocked to see his face. He was ashen and he looked like he hadn't slept for days. He walked over to us and began crying and apologizing profusely. We couldn't understand what he was saying between his sobs, but I guess he was crying from guilt and what his wife had instigated. We asked the priest to call a taxi to take us to the train station. One of the men who helped carry me out of the cabin accompanied us, and boy, did he love to talk. The three of us were feeling quite depressed with what happened over the last few days, but he didn't seem to notice at all. From all the talking he was doing, we were able to figure out that the monk actually did know how to perform the ritual. We were able to gather as much because the man told us not to try it when we got back. Anything that happens will be all on us, he said. There was no way this man knew, and not the monk. And now we were worried that he'd lied to us about our safety, but we didn't have the energy to go back to the temple. We just needed to get out of there, so we paid the taxi driver and hopped on the train. None of us talked the whole trip home. Since then, nothing has happened. I mean, that's why I'm able to sit here and share this story with you right now. Kai has become really scared of spiders ever since this trip, and as for me, I've become a bit fearful of the dark, but nothing crazy. A fair while after all this happened, the three of us talked to the other two friends that were supposed to meet up with us that summer. They seemed to believe most of what we told them, and they decided to call the ryokan out of curiosity. What assholes. Anyway, some woman answered the phone and they could hear crows crying in the background. They told us to call to see if it was Makiko who answered. Whether it's her or not, I definitely don't have the courage to call that number ever again.